Catherine was just an ordinary secretary, but one day, she was forced into pretending to be the girlfriend of Alexander, a ruthless and cold-hearted CEO. At first, it was merely an arrangement, but the longer they spent together, the line between pretense and reality began to blur. As love slowly crept into their hearts, would Alexander have the courage to give up everything for her? If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit like, share it with your friends and family, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more heartfelt stories. The clock on the wall struck exactly 8 a.m. Inside the spacious office on the top floor of Reed Enterprises, Catherine Hayes hurriedly stacked a pile of documents on the desk, preparing for another busy day. She was the personal secretary to Alexander Reed, a CEO infamous for his cold demeanor, ruthless decisions, and complete disbelief in love. Catherine wasn't the type to tolerate injustice. She always spoke her mind, no matter who she was facing. That was precisely why she was the only one brave enough to challenge Alexander without getting fired. She never imagined she would one day be pulled into such an absurd contract. "Miss Hayes," a deep, authoritative voice echoed as Alexander stepped into the office. His strikingly handsome yet emotionless face remained unreadable, and his smoky gray eyes studied her intently. Catherine placed his coffee on the desk, straightened her posture, and greeted him professionally. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." "Sit down." He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. She raised an eyebrow, but complied. Facing her boss, she had a strong feeling that something was off. Alexander never engaged in small talk, nor did he summon her unless it was strictly work-related. "You've been my secretary for 2 years now, correct?" he asked. "Yes." "You're very competent at your job, but today I'm not here to discuss work." He leaned forward, lacing his long fingers together as he locked eyes with her. "I have a proposal for you." Catherine arched a brow. "What kind of proposal?" Alexander sat back slightly, his gaze unwavering. "I want you to pretend to be my girlfriend for 3 months." Catherine was just an ordinary secretary, but one day, she was forced into pretending to be the girlfriend of Alexander, a ruthless and cold-hearted CEO. At first, it was merely an arrangement, but the longer they spent together, the line between pretense and reality began to blur. As love slowly crept into their hearts, would Alexander have the courage to give up everything for her? If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit like, share it with your friends and family, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more heartfelt stories. The clock on the wall struck exactly 8 a.m. Inside the spacious office on the top floor of Reed Enterprises, Catherine Hayes hurriedly stacked a pile of documents on the desk, preparing for another busy day. She was the personal secretary to Alexander Reed, a CEO infamous for his cold demeanor, ruthless decisions, and complete disbelief in love. Catherine wasn't the type to tolerate injustice. She always spoke her mind, no matter who she was facing. That was precisely why she was the only one brave enough to challenge Alexander without getting fired. She never imagined she would one day be pulled into such an absurd contract. "Miss Hayes." A deep, authoritative voice echoed as Alexander stepped into the office. His strikingly handsome, yet emotionless face remained unreadable, and his smoky gray eyes studied her intently. Catherine placed his coffee on the desk, straightened her posture, and greeted him professionally. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." "Sit down." He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. She raised an eyebrow but complied. Facing her boss, she had a strong feeling that something was off. Alexander never engaged in small talk, nor did he summon her unless it was strictly work-related. "You've been my secretary for 2 years now, correct?" he asked. "Yes." "You're very competent at your job, but today, I'm not here to discuss work." He leaned forward, lacing his long fingers together as he locked eyes with her. "I have a proposal for you." Catherine arched a brow. "What kind of proposal?" Alexander sat back slightly, his gaze unwavering. "I want you to pretend to be my girlfriend for 3 months." She couldn't help but laugh. "You're joking, right?" His expression remained serious. "I never joke about business." "This isn't business." Catherine crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair. "Why would I pretend to be your girlfriend?" Alexander folded his arms across his chest, his sharp gaze unwavering. "My parents are pressuring me to get married. They've already chosen a woman for me, someone I have no intention of marrying. If I don't have someone by my side, they'll force me into that engagement. And if you agree to be my girlfriend for 3 months, I'll double your salary." Catherine's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "Very serious." Alexander nodded. "All I need from you is to accompany me to events, appear with me in front of the media, and play your role convincingly. Once the 3 months are over, our contract will end." Catherine shook her head, crossing her arms. "I don't think this is a good idea." "You need the money," Alexander stated bluntly, wasting no time with pleasantries. "You're saving up to help your younger sibling go to college, aren't you?" Catherine bit her lip. He was right. She might not like Alexander's personality, but she couldn't afford to turn down such a large sum. It could help her brother get into the school he had always dreamed of. "Fine," she sighed. "I'll do it." A satisfied smile played on Alexander's lips. "Good. Tomorrow night, we'll be attending a charity gala hosted by my family. Be ready." Something about this felt off, but Catherine pushed the thought aside. This was just a fake arrangement, right? Standing before the full-length mirror in the dressing room, Catherine examined herself in the deep crimson velvet gown. The dress hugged her curves perfectly, accentuating her smooth, fair skin. Delicate, shimmering jewelry complemented her elegant updo, making her look more sophisticated than she had ever imagined. A strange feeling welled up inside her. She had never worn anything this luxurious before. Knock, knock. The sound of someone at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward and opened it. Alexander Reed stood before her, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. The soft glow of the chandelier reflected off his sleek dark hair, emphasizing the chiseled sharpness of his features. His gray eyes scanned her from head to toe, a flicker of approval flashing across them. "Not bad." Catherine rolled her eyes. "Was that supposed to be a compliment?" "You don't have to flatter me," he said with a smirk. "But if you're hoping for another raise, you might want to learn how to compliment your boss." She chuckled, shaking her head. "I'll think about it." Alexander extended his arm. "Let's go." The moment they entered the grand ballroom, all eyes turned to them. Murmurs spread throughout the crowd like wildfire. No one could believe that the cold, unattainable Alexander Reed was openly attending an event with an unknown secretary by his side. Catherine could feel the scrutinizing stares, but she maintained her poised smile. She recalled Alexander's instructions. "Just play the role of my girlfriend. Don't give anything away." Simple enough. She just had to act the part, get through the contract, collect her money, and walk away. Everything seemed under control, until she noticed something that made her heart pound. As they conversed with business partners, Alexander suddenly tightened his grip on her hand. His palm burned against hers, his hold almost possessive. Startled, Catherine turned to look at him, only to find that he had swiftly averted his gaze. His expression was unreadable, but his posture was tense. She followed his line of sight. There, across the room, stood a woman she had never seen before. The woman had golden blonde hair elegantly tied up, wearing a white spaghetti strap evening gown that accentuated her graceful shoulders. Her emerald green eyes were sharp, and her full red lips burned like fire. But most importantly, her face was filled with shock and pain as she saw Alexander tightly holding Catherine's hand. A strange feeling crept over Catherine. She had the uneasy sense that she was merely a pawn in a much bigger game. What exactly did Alexander want from her? Catherine could feel the tension rising in the air. She noticed Alexander's clenched jaw and the way the blonde woman was staring at him, her eyes full of hurt. Subtly, Catherine nudged Alexander with her elbow and whispered, "Who is she?" Alexander didn't answer right away. His gaze remained locked on the woman, a complex emotion flickering in his stormy gray eyes. Finally, he turned to Catherine and murmured just loud enough for her to hear, "Just play your role." And then the woman stepped forward. "Eleanor," Alexander greeted, his voice deep and unreadable. The woman let out a soft chuckle, though her eyes betrayed her emotions. "It's been a while, Alex." "Alex?" So they were close. "Aren't you going to introduce me?" Eleanor blinked at Catherine, her gaze assessing. Alexander didn't hesitate. "This is Catherine, my girlfriend." Catherine's stomach tightened. She knew this was all an act, but Eleanor's expression made her feel like an imposter. "Really?" Eleanor smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "I never thought you'd be able to forget the past so easily." Catherine felt Alexander's fingers tighten around hers. She turned to look at him, but found only cold determination in his expression. "It ended a long time ago, Eleanor," Alexander said, his voice low and firm. "You should move on with your life." Eleanor studied him for a long moment before letting out a bitter smile. "Is that so? I thought—" "Never mind." She shook her head, finally shifting her gaze to Catherine. "And you. Congratulations." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Catherine gently pulled her hand from Alexander's grip, taking a small step back. "Who is she?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. Alexander clenched his jaw, exhaling slowly as if debating whether to answer. At last he said, "She's someone from my past." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Someone you once loved?" He didn't reply, but his silence spoke louder than words. The atmosphere between them grew heavy. Catherine felt an odd tightness in her chest, an unfamiliar and unwelcome feeling. She reminded herself that this was just an act, that she had no right to feel jealous or uneasy, and yet her heart still clenched painfully in her chest. "What are you thinking?" Alexander's deep voice pulled her from her thoughts. She forced a smile, shaking her head. "Nothing." Alexander studied her for a long moment, as if trying to see through her lie. Then, without warning, he wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her closer. "Then keep playing your role," he murmured, and before she could react, he lowered his head and kissed her. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd around them. Catherine froze. Alexander's lips were soft, yet the kiss burned through her like wildfire. Just an act, she reminded herself, just a show. But her heart pounded wildly, betraying her. She didn't notice the furious green eyes watching from across the room. Eleanor's fists clenched at her sides. She refused to let things end this way. From that night on, Catherine noticed a shift in Alexander's behavior. He no longer kept his distance. Every time they were in public, his arm would linger around her waist. His hand would hold hers tightly, and, most confusing of all, the way he looked at her no longer seemed like mere pretense. But what unsettled her the most was that even when they were alone, he still hadn't changed. Alexander Thornfield, the cold and ruthless CEO, was now treating her with an unexpected gentleness. She didn't know whether to feel flattered or terrified. One late afternoon, as Catherine was organizing documents in Alexander's office, the door suddenly swung open. "Alex, we need to talk." "Eleanor." She stood in the doorway, her expression resolute. None of the vulnerability from before remained. Catherine immediately sensed the tension thickening in the room. Alexander remained seated behind his desk, his fingers tapping lightly against the surface. "I don't think we have anything left to say." Eleanor smirked. "Do you really expect me to believe that you love her?" Catherine stiffened. Eleanor stepped forward, her voice sharp. "I know you, Alex. Alexander Thornfield doesn't open his heart to anyone. You don't believe in love. And now, all of a sudden, you have a girlfriend? A secretary, no less? What exactly are you trying to prove?" Alexander didn't respond. His gray eyes were like steel, cold and impenetrable. Eleanor scoffed. Or is this just an act? Catherine held her breath. Alexander slowly stood from his chair, walking toward Eleanor. He neither confirmed nor denied her accusation. Instead, his voice was chillingly calm. If I were putting on an act, do you think I'd let you figure it out so easily? Eleanor faltered. Whatever was between us is over, Eleanor, Alexander said, his voice unwavering. I don't need to prove anything to you. Catherine was taken aback when she saw Eleanor lose her composure. You're lying, Eleanor snapped. If you truly love her, then prove it. She turned to Catherine, a challenging smirk playing on her lips. If you two are really in love, then kiss in front of me. The air in the room grew unbearably heavy. Catherine's eyes widened in shock. What? Eleanor crossed her arms, her gaze taunting. What's wrong? Or is this just an act? Alexander's expression darkened as he looked at Catherine. Then, without warning, he gripped her waist and pulled her close. Alex. He didn't give her a chance to react. His hand tilted her chin up, and in the next moment, he lowered his head and kissed her. Catherine froze. Unlike the kiss at the party, this one was slow, deeper. Her heart pounded wildly. Eleanor clenched her jaw, her hands curling into fists. When Alexander finally pulled away, his gaze remained locked on Catherine. Are you satisfied? He asked, but not to Eleanor. He was asking Catherine. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with conflicting emotions. She knew this was just to prove a point to Eleanor. And yet, why did it feel so real? Eleanor let out a frustrated huff before turning on her heels and storming out, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Alexander still held Catherine in his arms. She couldn't look away from him. You? Her voice came out hoarse. You didn't have to do that. Alexander didn't respond right away. After a moment, he finally whispered, I don't like being doubted. But his eyes told a different story, that this was no longer just an act. After the incident with Eleanor, Catherine found her relationship with Alexander more confusing than ever. She could no longer deny it. She had fallen for him. But what about Alexander? Did he truly love her? Or was everything he did still part of this elaborate performance? She couldn't go on like this. She needed answers. A week later, Alexander hosted a grand party to announce his company's new project. Catherine still played the role of his girlfriend in front of the public, but tonight, she couldn't keep up the charade any longer. Once she finished her duties, she pulled Alexander away from the crowd, leading him to the quiet rooftop terrace. Alexander raised an eyebrow at her. Is there something you want to say? Catherine took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Alex, this charade, it has to end. His expression hardened. What do you mean? She met his gaze head on, her voice trembling slightly. I can't keep pretending. I've fallen in love with you. Alexander froze. But I don't know if everything you've done was ever real, she said with a sad smile. If this is still just a game to you, then I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Silence stretched between them. Catherine felt her heart clench. She turned to leave, but... Wait! His hand wrapped tightly around her wrist, stopping her. She bit her lip, unwilling to turn back. Alex, I never thought of this as a game, he said, his voice rough. Her breath hitched. Alexander clenched his fists, as if battling with himself. After a long pause, he finally admitted, I planned everything. A fake relationship, a contract, a game with an expiration date. He let out a quiet laugh, but his eyes were filled with conflict. But there was one thing I didn't plan for. He held her gaze. I didn't plan to fall in love with you. Catherine's heart skipped a beat. You think you're the only one who's confused? Alexander gave a rare, almost self-deprecating smile. I tried to lie to myself, that I was only doing what was necessary to protect my company. But the truth is, I've been in love with you for a long time. Catherine was stunned. Alexander stepped closer, gently cupping her cheek. I love you, Catherine, he murmured, his voice deep and sincere. And I don't want this to be just an act anymore. She looked into his eyes, her heart overflowing with emotion. She didn't know who moved first, but in the next moment, their lips met. This kiss wasn't to prove anything to anyone. It was simply because they truly loved each other. 1 year later, Catherine walked down the garden aisle of the Thornfield estate, her white wedding gown flowing gracefully in the gentle breeze. Her heart pounded faster as she saw Alexander waiting at the end of the aisle, looking striking in his black tuxedo. As she reached him, he took her hand and held it tightly. I told you, Alexander whispered. I was never going to let you go. Catherine beamed, and I never wanted to leave. As the officiant read the vows, Alexander leaned in and whispered softly in her ear, I love you. And this time, there was no contract, no pretense, only real love. Thank you for taking the time to read this story. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to click like, share this story with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more meaningful stories.